There we go, you're on.
There. Good evening and welcome to the June 28th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission. Tonight we're going to continue our discussion on a proposed rezone of parcels that were eliminated, taken out of the central area plan. But first we have our two sets of minutes that we have to approve. The first one is for June the 14th. And if you hopefully have read it and understand that it was the park plan and Old Town were discussed on that evening. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of June 14th?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of June 14th.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. I want to remind everybody that Old Town is still under our discussion, and we have scheduled for July the 12th to continue with our discussion of Old Town, the changing of the boundary in the south end of the city. So hopefully before the next meeting, before the 12th, you again go over the minutes that we are in here, because as usual, they are absolutely complete of everything that happened on that night, so we might want to do that. So I need a motion to approve the minutes of June 21st.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of June 21st.
A second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Any changes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Before we start a discussion on the rezone, and before Trish gives us a wonderful update, when we ended our meeting last week, we had a discussion, a proposed meeting between the business owners in the new rezone area and the city. And so Ron and I were able to attend that meeting, and it was a very constructive meeting.
This was in addition to the hearing last week?
In addition. It was on Tuesday.
Okay.
And it was very constructive. The business owners were able to explain why they should not be downgraded from where they were. And the city was very open to listen to them, and I think they came up with a good compromise. There were a few things that the city did change, but Trish is going to explain each one of the proposals tonight, so that's what we're looking at, is basically the main things that will be changed if a rezone appears. So with that, I'm going to ask Trish to go over the changes, the city's proposal for the rezone.
Great. And if you need a paper copy of the packet, since they were late breaking and just were published last night, the copies are on the middle table. It was a very good meeting on Tuesday with property owners, and the recommendation we came up with for those that were zoned intensive commercial that were brought out of central Issaquah would be to have them stay with the name intensive commercial, but also change the development standards for intensive commercial for the rear setback and change that from 10 feet to 5 feet. And also to change the impervious surface of intensive commercial from 65% to 90%. And those are in red, the changes to all of that we're proposing to change for all of the intensive commercial properties outside of Central. So that's what we all came up with for the properties zone intensive commercial. And for the properties zone destination retail that were removed from Central, we all agreed on a recommendation to create a new zone called destination retail and to move that into the IMC and have all the development standards for bulk and setbacks to be the same as Central, except for the front setback, and we're proposing to make that 10 versus 0 in the Central standards. So those were the two proposals that we came up with, and in your packets, there's all the comparisons of all the zones and all the ways we tried to go this way and that way. But this is the real simple and basic recommendation that we came out with at the end of Tuesday's meeting.
Trish, by simply then just applying this to all of intensive commercial outside of central Issaquah, are there any other parcels that are impacted other than kind of the ones we're looking at in Old Town and
Yes.
Route 10?
The gray areas with numbers on them that are north of I-90, those would be the ones that were removed from Central. And the ones that are sort of in betweens those, it's a technical word, those would be for the most part, because there's not that many. Well, actually, I take that back. No, there are no other parcels zoned intensive commercial.
There are, actually, there are two. There's one that is just to the left of the urban village, the solid orange. There's a rectangle up there. It looks like above number 9 and to the right of number 2.
Here?
Nope, to the left,
Left? This
And
one?
up.
Blank White's
Up.
one?
up there.
This one?
That's intensive commercial. And then also down there, the new King County parcel.
Oh.
That was right.
Down here.
That one, yes.
Okay, because that would be the site where we're hoping CenturyLink would move so the TOD can happen.
Oh, that's the
next
bottom
to
of the valley, King County
Yes.
parcel,
Yes.
not the top of it, which is.
Yes,
um,
full of trees.
No, but that's the top of it is a different zoning.
Yes,
It's facilities, yeah,
Yes.
commercial or community facilities. Okay, so would this in effect upzone those two parcels to bring them in alignment with all these
yes.
other ones? Okay.
Well, they would have increased impervious surface and an increased rear setback.
Okay. Yeah, they're
I'm
not.
sorry,
It's not
decreased
upzoned in
rear
the sense they're
setback.
not getting height and bulk, but they're
Right,
getting.
they're not getting any
getting-
additional
okay.
height, but they are getting more impervious surface.
Okay.
Other questions?
But nothing elsewhere in the city.
Correct, that's our only intensive
okay.
commercial zoned area.
Thank you.
Any other questions before you deliberate?
So before we, discuss everything, since you did not, the three of you did not attend the meeting and hear the business owners' reasons for the need to make these changes in their zoning, I wanted to ask if, since there are a few members of the the community out there, if they want to make any additional comments before we open it up for discussion among the commissioners.
Can I ask Trish one more question? Clarifying, or do you want me to wait? Okay.
Does anybody want to make any more comments?
No, it was a great discussion, and I feel like it was well-run, and we were heard our concerns, and those of the members of the co-op that is the Grange, and I feel like we settled on something that's better for everybody and works for both Bones and us.
So Ron and I were there, and we were there as strictly as listeners, just to listen and be, if we needed to answer any questions for the commissioners. I think it was a great meeting. I think the city was open, and I think that in the future, any issues that come up like this, I hope that the people who are on one side and the city can get together and work out a reasonable solution.
Completely agree.
So thank you for all of the business owners that were there, and the city did an awesome job. The staff did an awful job, so thank you. So, any questions from the commissioners? AJ?
Can you talk about, for the destination retail, why you're sticking with the 10-foot setback? Because you highlighted that as one of the few differences. I was
Right.
just curious on the logic behind that.
The zero setback from Central is because everything to be up to the street for that whole pedestrian feeling, and when we actually looked at destination retail, most of those uses are already set back a bit because their frontage is East Gilman. And so Bohm's, the Grange, if you go down that street, remember in the tour, they're all already set back quite a bit. And so we thought a zero setback wasn't as realistic for that area, being that it's just not the same. So we put a 10-foot setback so that they would be able to use those areas the way they're using them now and not have a detriment.
So if you have a 0 front setback, you don't have to build to the street, right? You can be back.
So in central, though, it's a set 2 line, not a setback.
Right, yes, okay, so in central, it's a set 2, and I understand that. So in outside of central, is it a 10-foot
Setback.
minimum, or is it a set 2?
It's a minimum.
I'm just wondering why, I get why we would not want a set 2 line. I'm just wondering why the minimum isn't just 0, and let them build up if they want to, and if they don't want to, they don't need to.
So part of it is the uses that are in destination retail. They are a destination by vehicle today. If you look at the Grange and XXX and Bohm's, most of their customers actually drive there, right? And so that 10 feet, when you look at how they're laid out now, most of those front yard setbacks are either landscaping or they're, circulation areas. And, I guess I don't feel strongly about that, AJ. If you were passionate about making that a 0 setback and not a set 2 line, I don't know that necessarily flips my cart upside down. I think the reason why we were suggesting the 10-foot setback was it was more in keeping with the retail zone that existed out there before Central. So part of this was, in a way, trying to look at what we originally were proposing and taking it ended up being a little bit of a Frankenstein outcome. But I think that's why the 10-foot setback was being proposed, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I think, and not to sidetrack on just this, we can talk more big picture, but I'd like to consider 0. I certainly don't want to set 2. That would be way too burdensome. But I think also then not requiring a setback either. Just throwing that out there.
We ask each other questions or not?
You can,
Okay, thank you. I'm learning the protocol. All right, so AJ, what's your concern? Why you feel strongly about that?
It's a concern in the sense that while I certainly get that right now, most people get there by car, and I don't expect that to change in the short term. I think the vision for Old Town and State Route 10 is to be more and more walkable over time, especially as Central Issaquah gets built up and there are people that are living within, not a short walk, within walkable distance. And so, if in 5 or 10 years, one of the parcels wants to redevelop and have something at the street front, I just see no reason to prohibit that. I don't think we need to, we certainly don't need to require it like we are in Gilman and Pickering, but I don't see any reason for us to prohibit it either.
so what would be your overall estimation or picture of what you want that highway, that road down there to look like? Do you want, actually, we're talking about commercial buildings sometimes. Do you want a commercial building right at 0?
I think so, in the sense that that part of State Route 10 is no longer a highway. Certainly the built environment was for when it was a highway, but it's not anymore. And particularly if we are going to bring in a part of Old Town, I think I would like to see it over time evolve to actually be more like Old Town. I remember us talking about using that part of the road, not necessarily as like a festival street, that would be too much, but the idea being that the broad right-of-way of State Route 10 is an asset that we can use for things other than just driving and parking as public right-of-way, and that would mean, I think over time, some of the buildings would maybe come forward.
Any other discussion on that point?
I think, I like the idea of actually having the setback for consistency, so that it has the same look and feel throughout the whole experience,
But consistent with what?
with what it is today.
Okay. So you don't
We got
want,
the Grange and we got Bohm's, they're not going to change.
sure. So you don't want a new building that's just stuck out there like a sore thumb?
So if we had, let's say the building, let's say we had the lot to the west of the Grange, come in and build right out to the edge of the street, it would almost, it wouldn't match the fact that, it wouldn't match the Grange, it wouldn't match Triple X, it wouldn't match Bohm's, wouldn't match the businesses across the street. Now, also thinking 50 years out, things can change. Maybe we can readdress that at the time, if there's a reason to go back and actually change it. But it would be really jarring, I think, to come into that area and all of a sudden there's a building right out at the very front with the zero setback. So I think it would be the wrong visual experience.
Okay. Just remind me, which parcels are the ones impacted on this map?
Destination retail are in the purple.
The purple, okay. Does this include the Lazy Boy? Where's the Lazy Boy lot on this?
It's that orange one,
It's the, yeah,
So is that,
Nevada upside down.
right here.
okay.
It's what upside down?
It does, yeah. So that is
Well
what?
done. I
Cultural
get
and
that.
business. Okay, so that is neither of these two, that lot.
Correct, at
Okay.
CBD.
Keith, I have a question for you. As far as the setback goes,
I sat down.
this will be easy, I promise.
Awesome. I like easy.
So let's say the Grange has a catastrophic event and they lose the front half of their property. Fire takes out the gas pumps.
Midwest cyclone.
Yes, a hurricane, Sharknado. In this case, it would be Hey-nado, but that's okay. And they have to rebuild.
Yes.
Would they have to go up to the 10-foot? And if so, that was, the 10-foot would be a maximum.
So the way a setback works is if you put a number in there like 10 feet, they could go that close to the front street, but they could choose to be at 20 feet or 30 feet. And as you know, the Grange has their pumps out front, so they're currently well beyond that. But if they did want to rebuild with a 10-foot, the difference between what you and AJ are talking about is they would have to maintain that 10-foot frontage of mostly landscaping. My guess is it's mostly kind of the grass and stuff out front. Under AJ's proposal, which I don't know if he's made a proposal, if he does come forward and say he would like that as his proposal, they could build the front of the Grange building right at their property line.
Yeah, I think I'd like the idea of having a zero setback, because I'm kind of looking at it and like, even if, Triple X and the Grange never change, but like across the street, there's that little strip mall. Like if that got redeveloped and had some retail that was actually at the frontage, since, that's the very end of the State Route 10, and so if people could walk back and forth from the Grange to that, I think that would be better than current, if the property got redeveloped. I think, so I think my proposal is, keep it as a setback, not a build two, but change it from 10 to 0.
I like the fact that there is some landscaping, trees in there, and I think that will be as much of a advantage to people walking, to be able to stroll through something that's really nice. If something goes in there, you can put I don't know if it's even zoned for putting in a cafe or whatever else in there. There's a room to do that and make it friendly to the.
Yeah, clarifying question. So for the setback, for something like gas stations, or if you had an outdoor cafe, does that need to be more than 10 feet back, or it's just the actual structure?
You can have outdoor seating in
Okay,
your,
so you can have stuff right at the property
Right.
line. Okay.
Okay.
Right,
Oh, can I
unless
ask a
it's-
question? If memory serves me, I don't believe there's sidewalks over there right now, correct?
No, there's just shoulder.
Right. Because I've done some walking over there, and I seem to remember it. I was watching carefully when I had my kids around with me. So I'm just wondering, if we think about that becoming, there's some other things I think that might need to happen
First.
before that becoming a walkable area. And, I'm not sure, if you put the zero setback? What does that mean for sidewalks and putting in a requirement for that or an easement for that? But
That's a good point.
I'm thinking that would, to me, be kind of I'd want that plan before we just say, let's,
That's a good point,
them
yeah.
up.
No, it can't really be walkable if there's no
yeah,
pedestrian path.
yeah.
Okay, so
Fine.
so any other questions on that particular issue about, no? Anything else that you see on that plan that might need further understanding that the property owners have worked with the city and that they've come up with the changes are not that great?
So, yeah, so on the printout, we're going from option 1, which is the current, to the yellow?
Correct.
Yeah. And then what was the proposal that we originally got out that they objected to? Was that option 2 or 3?
Not sure what the numbers are, but the original one was to go back to their zoning that predated the central plan. For destination retail, it would have been the retail zone.
Okay.
And for IC, it would have been the IC that's outside of central.
Okay, so I think
And both of
option
those have
2.
65% impervious, and that was the biggest concern.
I think to AJ's point, option 1 and option 2 were what the city put together. Option 3 is what we discussed at our last PPC meeting. And then the one in yellow right now is what we
The current
pulled out
proposal.
of from the meeting with the city, with the business owners as a proposal. In this, I have a question for Trish and for Keith. So we were originally going from 90 to 65, and I heard a lot of the pushback about increasing the impervious surface, and the point behind the impervious surface is for water runoff. So would they end up being required to have dry wells or storage facilities to channel that runoff? What would that look like? Is that a significant cost barrier to increase capacity? So we could get 85, but still give them what they need?
Did you ask like 20 questions there?
All wrapped up in a one.
I think he's asking, by increasing it to 90%, are we adding any additional cost to a potential redevelopment? Is that a correct
Yes.
translation?
And what are we going to do with the water runoff?
Okay. It's a great question. So what I would say is, right now, basically there's a hierarchy of stormwater treatments that you're supposed to follow when you develop property, based on King County Stormwater Manual, Department of Ecology Manual. So under NPDES, it basically says your first task is to look at whether or not you can infiltrate your stormwater on your site. Okay? So if they have permeable soils and can infiltrate there, then what they would do would be to build a wet well underneath their parking lot. The stormwater would go into it, and it would basically then perk into the ground, and whatever doesn't perk, they would pipe it off-site. Okay? So there is still, even though they can pave their entire site, there's still a stormwater obligation for them to try to infiltrate on-site as opposed to piping it off. But that ultimately is a function of whether or not the soils can accept that. By allowing them to, and so is that more expensive than doing like a detention pond or a rain garden? Not necessarily, because it's a concrete vault under your parking lot. The water goes into the ground, or it goes out through a cartridge filter, and it all has a cost associated with it, but I'm not sure it's any more expensive to do it in a vault versus in a natural feature. As it relates to cost, I mean, so the opportunities, as you heard Tuesday, what you heard from the business owners, both of the intensive commercial and the destination retail, is their property is only so big. And by allowing them to increase the impervious or keep the impervious at the level that it was at in Central, and to potentially minimize their yard setbacks, it gives them more ability to creatively look at increasing development on their property, because their property's not getting any bigger, so they have to use what they have left. And by taking out some of those other restrictions, like impervious limits and setbacks from side yards and rear yards, it gives them more opportunity to look at adding density of some kind to their property. Did I answer your questions?
Almost, yes.
Okay.
So if we went from, and I understand the deal about the soils and so on. So if we went from 85 and gave them 90, are there other regulations that would be a barrier to giving them that 5%? In other words, if we gave them the 5%, all of a sudden, do they have other obligations they have to meet that are higher criteria based on King County or state criteria?
So let me answer it maybe this way, and you can tell me if I didn't answer it right. So you have an obligation to manage your stormwater on your property based on certain criteria. And if they choose to have more impervious surface, which means more water runs off the property, then they still have to detain it, and they can only release it at a certain rate no matter what. So what it means is they may have to build a bigger detention vault to hold the stormwater longer and meter it out at a slower pace than if the site was 65% impervious and some of it could just infiltrate and not run off. So I guess it's an engineering exercise and nothing else. So you can calculate the amount of stormwater coming off the property. You have to meet a certain rate of discharge, and that then tells you how big your vault needs to be if you put it, say, underneath the building or underneath the parking lot. If it's a pond, an open pond, same calculation. You have to have a certain volume of water that you can hold on your site during peak storms and discharge it at a rate that doesn't cause flooding impacts.
So in this area, would there be a percolation pond for them to discharge their water?
So so their first hoop that they have to jump over is, can they percolate it on their property? So they would do a soil analysis or a perk test and see how quickly the water would go in. And then that would help their engineers understand how they would potentially deal with their stormwater. If they found that the water table was too high, now in this part, I mean, near the creek, it could be, but as you get farther away from the creek, this part of town actually is better than, say, closer to the lake, where the soils don't perk very well. Their engineer would then be able to figure out their stormwater requirements based on what they could accommodate on site.
Okay, so in essence, if we gave them the 90% and obviously they can build down to an 85%, it would be then up to them to decide whether or not it would be cost beneficial.
Right. So it's the same,
That
so
extra five.
to put it another way, Ron, this might help. It's the same as AJ's setback requirement conversation, right? So just because you give them 90% impervious, that's a cap. It doesn't mean they have to do that. They could choose to redevelop their site in a way that would be 65% and have a bunch of pervious areas. That's a decision they would make as a property owner. They don't have to.
Thank you,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
And-
In the PPC meeting on the 21st, I didn't see anything in the video, because I missed that one,
It was.
about any concerns from property owners on water management. Did anything come up on the Tuesday meeting?
No, it didn't. All of those issues already decided on no matter what property it is, how water is percolated, how it is contained. By giving them 90% does not give them the ability to just blacktop 90%. They have to abide by all of the other rules that are set up in the city. So understanding that, you know, you can have 90%, but if you can't contain the water based on this, this, and this, you're not going to get your 90%.
Got it.
And the cost is on the property
It's,
owner,
you know,
right?
it's just
Yeah.
like building
Okay.
any building.
Yeah.
Does it pencil out to the developer to build that particular building any way that they want to build it? So there's always rules, and you saw these 127 pages that you got. There are specific things that you can and cannot do, all of which have been percolated for the last many years of how to take care of the things in the city.
Good double use of percolated.
I had
Okay.
one last question.
One last question.
All
yeah.
right, so Keith, one last question for you. Because this actually came up in some of the discussion during the meeting, and that was the property owner to the far most eastern area on Gilman, last address on Gilman.
Oh, Sam Kyle?
Yes,
These ones
yeah.
down here?
So he wanted to go all the way up to the very edge of the property line, so 0 setback for an underground parking. And then we're talking 10 feet back from the road for above-grade parking. That would be acceptable all along these areas, right? For retail, so someone, if they wanted to go in with underground parking, they could go all the way to 0, and then above ground would be 10 feet back.
So, so right now, and I believe Mr. Kyle agreed that 10 feet would work for him at the end of the day. I think he was originally trying or advocating for 0. I believe that that 10-foot building setback line would apply underground as well. Now, I don't know that. It's a super great question, and I'm not sure of the answer, and I'm looking at Trish to see if she knows. So the problem is, so if you put, and the reason is, so let's assume you expected that 10 feet to be landscaped, right? If you put the parking garage underground, the likelihood that you're growing anything on top of it is probably slim, because it's all gonna be concrete. So I believe that 10 feet means structure at 10 feet, even if it's underground structure. But his frontage for what he was talking about was on Third. And, you know, the character of Third, what I would say that 10 feet would match in better with the existing buildings that are because you've got some other stuff. So this will be a park across the street. Right now it's residences. But then as you get further south, all this is just housing. And so that 10-foot setback would be much more in keeping, I think, with the character of what that's going to feel like. You know, this is hard to really see because it's a bunch of property lines, but out there's one big building in the middle of a parking lot. And what he was talking about was putting another office building kind of where the existing parking lot is. And as we talked about, that parcel is really more fronting on Gilman, which, you know, the 10 feet is this little area back here. So that kind of ends up being kind of a side yard for him. So I think that's why Mr. Kyle got to a point where I think he was okay with the 10-foot front yard setback, recognizing that the others were 5s.
And to that point, on Third, that would be a 10-foot setback? Because you can't have 2 front yards.
So for the parcels, and we talked about these ones at the very north end, right? There's a house.
Right.
Those ones would have a 10-foot front yard setback on Third.
But if he purchases those parcels for the purpose of development, he would be merging all those parcels together, possibly.
So he has those parcels, he owns them now. So do we want to go to an aerial photograph? Would that be easier?
Yeah. Because based on the way we're discussing these policies, he would have a 10-foot setback on Gilman, and he would have a 0 setback on Third, which would be out of character with the other residents on Third.
Okay, so this is what Mr. Kyle currently owns. He owns, this is the Liberty office building right here. And can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. No, you're good. But what we talked about was he actually owns this and this and this and this. And we talked about this house right here. And, he's looking at, can he do something different with this northern part of his property, which really faces Third? But then the bigger conversation was to take this existing surface parking lot and potentially put it underground and build probably another office building like in here, which will have no setback issues because it's really kind of, it doesn't have any, his street frontage, here's the front of his property at the end of Gilman, right here. So I think in terms of what he's planning to do, at least currently, I think what we're talking about was meeting his expectations for redevelopment.
I agree, but aspirationally, let's say he sells all of this property and
Yeah.
someone else comes in, or he
Yep.
decides to do something radically different. The question comes back to Third, because that would be, if he merged all those parcels together.
Yes.
Third would become a side yard, would become a zero setback, and which would be out of character with other properties in on Third.
No, I think if you merged all that, then you would say Third is the front.
Well, it depends what you're merging. So if you take, so this is like a 2-story office building here, as is this. If you merge these parcels and created one, if you chose to address it off of Third, then that would be the front, even though it's the long property end. It would be their legal street frontage. If you merge them in with kind of the Liberty office project, then I agree with you, Ron. I think it's a side to the front still being this little kind of nub on Gilman.
So it depends upon where they address it?
To
is
some
what the
extent.
frontage?
So could this be one of those properties where, that has an exception to the 0010?
So right now, so I guess the question is, are you concerned about the proposed setbacks because of a future lot consolidation that one property owner might do?
Yes.
Okay.
We were already having sort of that conversation. It's going that direction, right?
Well, Ron, are you proposing something like a 10-foot side, front, and back setback for all properties?
Not for all properties, but for this property specifically, because this property is unique in the sense that its address is Gilman, which is basically the width of that street, which is between those houses and the freeway. So Third actually becomes a zero setback line, which is his side yard. It would allow him to build an office building all the way up to the edge of the street.
If he wanted to consolidate his properties, merge the lots, does the city have any say with that, or is that just filing with the county?
Well, so if you merged all those lots, we have some interpretive ability to determine yards. So right now, because of the orientation of those buildings the way they are, I think we'd still consider Third the front. Now, if they merged those lots and they cleared the buildings, so they were starting from scratch, it's hard to say whether we would consider this a side. It seems like you could say that's the front, and that's the side, but it might also be where they take access from. And right now, as you can see, these parcels access off a Third. So if they were wanting to keep those driveways, we may still say that's the front of this parcel because that's where they're getting vehicular access. So there's a lot of variables, and the city does have some level of discretion. But I hear your concern. I don't know what the likelihood of like that complete lot consolidation and complete bulldozing of those buildings is. It could happen someday.
That's kind of like saying we encourage mixed use. I don't know. Now that we've had this, and I think my commissioners understand the problem that I'm trying, or the point that I'm trying to make, what's your feedback?
Well, I just wanted to clarify, across the street is going to become a city park, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I completely understand, Ron, what you're saying, but this is also unique in that say it goes to, they build, it gets consolidated, a developer comes in and they build, right to the property line. That's going to be in a park across the street. It's not going to be kind of the residential look and feel, and so I'm thinking out loud slightly, but so it's kind of going to be, in the future, I think it's going to be unique, and so then the question in my head is, do we have a problem with potentially a building going all the way to the property line across from a city park, or would we still want it set back, with some trees and shrubbery? That's just what I'm thinking as you're talking about it.
And that would be worst case. It sounds like the city has the ability, if we were in that situation, to deem third the front.
Yes, I think we have some ability to do that. And right now, there is a sidewalk on this side of Third. It looks like it's kind of right at the back of right-of-way. So, if that were to happen, and if that were considered a side yard, and they were allowed to build to that side yard setback, there could be a building right behind the sidewalk.
Could we write the policy where 0010, where more than 60% or more than 60% of the,
So this is code, not policy, right?
Okay.
So we need to think black and white, not shades of gray.
all right,
I think, Ron, like, I see what you're saying, but this seems like such a unique, unlikely case. I don't think we need to use this. I feel like this is the exception that proves the rule. I don't think we need to write our code looking at weird triangle lots.
well, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we've been soft in some of our language in the past and we haven't got what we wanted. So that's why we went back and redid the CIP. So this would be one of those situations where if the property owner did build out, would it create a visual impediment to the area? And would it really bother a lot of people?
So as it stands right now, are you comfortable with the code, if the property stays exactly the way it is? Are you comfortable with the way the setbacks, the 0 and 10 feet, are you comfortable with it the way it is now? If he doesn't do anything else to the property, the way it is now, it works, right? You're comfortable with that?
Provided that there's a 10-foot setback on Third.
So Ron, I'm just looking at the map as you're talking too. I mean, could this case also happen with, I'm looking at parcels 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37. I know what some of their current use is, but if we take away that piece of it and say, could these be consolidated and developed? I mean, do you run into the same issue then on Dogwood and on Crescent?
Well, I don't think you would, because the green checked area, which is right behind 37, 36, and 35, is actually going to be park space. And that would be, I believe, Bohm's Candy. The one exception to that would be parcel number 32, which I think is the Grange, and I guess that brings in the other question is, as far as setback, because that is a residential neighborhood, so that's probably even more important for this type of conversation, is that they could actually build out right up to the edge of the street or sidewalk, if there's a sidewalk there. I just think we should probably just talk through it.
No, I mean, I think if we have our very long-term hats on and we don't think about what's in there right now, I see your point. I mean, it would be a very stark contrast from, residential, single-family homes across the street to, fully developed.
Yeah,
And
that's
60
the parcel is looking at, that one right there.
And just to clarify, Keith, the highest these could get, a 65-foot maximum, is that, how many stories are we imagining here? So your worst-case scenario, Ron, I'm just trying to paint a picture, would be up to the property line and 5 stories tall.
No, because to get above the base height, you have to set back your upper floors. So that 5th floor and I think the 4th floor would be stepped back from that building face.
So 3 stories.
Isn't it? The
And
base is
property
40
line.
feet? Yeah, so it's 3 stories, step back, you could do 2 more.
Yeah, I'm just trying to paint a visual of,
Yeah.
the 30 years out and what we're thinking about. So 3 stories would be, and at the property line. And then, I'm just suggesting if you're concerned about that property, then you kind of have to look at, I think, the rest of those chunks too, because they're right up against single family. I mean, we're seeing a little bit of that happen in Old Town, with some of the multifamily units coming in up against some of the single family. More of just the zigzag nature of what that looks like. But again, I don't know how much we want to set code for 20, 30 years from now versus something that we feel like
So
everyone's bought into and feels
I'll
good
go back
about.
to my original question. Does it work set up the way it is right now? Yes? You don't know if he's going to combine all his properties, 2 properties, or not do anything and leave it the way it is. So the discussion seems to me that, you cannot imagine everything that's going to happen in the future. Besides the fact that they do combine 2 properties, they're going to look at those 2 properties based on something. Where are you going to put the front? What's the side? How are you going to have the access? And at that time, the city's going to have to look at it and say, it doesn't work. And I can't look 25 years out in the future. I mean, as long as it works now, I think some of the problems we've had, like my personal thing is I don't like a storage unit on Newport, but that was created because there was no code to prevent it. So I think we've gone through 500 codes, we've gone through 127 pages of what can and cannot be done in those areas. But we cannot, look at the future and provide everything. That's kind of what I think. So we're looking at it the way it is now. We have no idea what it's going to do in the future.
So think about it this way, Ron. I think your points are good. I think, though, one of the things is these properties, as part of Central Issaquah, could have done that, right? I mean, because the setbacks that we're talking about in terms of what the outcome is going to be are, other than the front, and we talked about the set 2 versus a setback, they're not different, right? So your concern that you have about Sam Kyle's property and its relationship to 3rd Avenue would have existed if these properties would have stayed in Central, right? And so I guess in a way, what the council asked us to do was to take these properties out of Central. They didn't say and fix any of the other problems that might have been associated with them while they were in Central. And so I guess I don't know, I don't want to make this harder than it needs to be because I don't know that what you're concerned about is likely to transpire in the next 20 years. So I don't know. I mean, nobody here that I know of has a crystal ball. So we're all trying to make the best decisions we can based on the information we have. And so if part of our charge was to really look at taking them out of Central, but not significantly downzoning or changing their development ability, I think leaving the setbacks the way that they're currently proposed is probably the closest outcome we could have to that intent.
Okay. Well, it's situational planning. Trying to be aspirational, looking out. If I own the Grange, based on this current criteria of zoning, I may want to put in mixed use and develop the property to its maximum, which means I'm going to jack it all the way up as high as I can go and fill it as full of people, right? Maximum, thinking that far ahead, 40, 50 years, that might happen. What would that look like? How would that impact neighborhood behind it?
Right.
And if I was a neighbor behind it, I'd be pretty upset if I had, look at a 65
Well,
building.
so likewise, we talked about Lazy Boy a little bit before. So Lazy Boy is in Old Town right now. It's in CBD. It could be 5 stories. So this building right here could have been bladed when Staples moved out, and there could be 5-story apartments running along the property line, more or less. I think there's a 5-foot side yard within CBD. So you know, when you are adjacent to different zoning, there are things that can get built that are very different than what you might be used to. And that's just part of, I think, the deal.
But I hope that it goes through the Development Commission and they use the requirements that we put in the way of building and things to build with and all the other things that we talked about to make it eye-pleasing to the city and something we would be pleased with.
Right.
Yeah, we would have the Old Town development standards as
So
tools in this
if you
case.
guys, that's another conversation. If you guys make that recommendation to add this area into Old Town, then it would have to follow the design guidelines for Old Town.
Just a follow-up question. In the Tuesday meeting, was there any discussion around the side or rear setbacks?
There was a lot of discussion about
Okay.
around the setbacks. The property owners for both the IC and retail lobbied hard to make the setbacks as small as possible.
Okay.
And the reasons they gave for zero setbacks were reasonable and understandable based on their businesses, and they want to have access to their property, so, and it worked. So the only thing I want to say, we talked about, this is a good one. If you have a garage 10 feet under and you're not sure if landscaping would grow, think about the Mercer Island Bridge that's covered with all this landscaping, and it will grow.
Yeah, but I think if you talk to Sam Kyle about how deep his garage was going to be, I think it was probably, you know, you don't dig deeper here than you have to, right? And so generally, and especially because you hit water fairly high up, our groundwater's fairly high, and so
I don't have to have any reasonable, so I like trees. It
Yeah.
could happen depending on the trees, depending on the soil, anything could happen to that, so,
absolutely.
okay. Are there any other discussions? Are we ready to, look, AJ?
One quick one on where it says IMC parking standards, IMC standards, that's all Issaquah Municipal Code? That's what IMC is?
Yes.
Okay. So, in those cases, this is just zoned the same as the rest of the non-CIP? Okay.
With that, do I have anybody who would like to make a motion to accept the proposal of the city in the way of the 2 zoning districts?
Just before motion, I just wanted to make a comment. Ron, I do appreciate the long-term look at this, because I do think that's something that is important, and we do need to be thinking about that, even in these near-term pieces. And the development's continuing to come. So I do really appreciate that you bring that perspective to this conversation. And I understand what the council was asking us to do and in this situation, but I also don't want to see us necessarily err on, well, that wasn't our mission, so let's not think through what's best. So just in the spirit of that, I'm in support of what we're planning here for tonight, but I do think I don't feel comfortable with moving forward as kind of the PPC, saying, well, it's not our mission to kind of think through the longer-term vision of what we want to do and put the code in place. And I know you guys have done a lot of great thinking around that, so it is where the teeth, I think, are. So the development is coming, it's here, it's happening, and so I think it's just good, thoughtful conversation, I think, to continue to push forward with.
I don't think that we should, be concerned with 40 or 50 years out, but I think that as we make plans, set codes or suggest codes, we should take into consideration what those codes would affect, what the outcome of those specific things were. So, and that takes you into the future that, yes, we like blue buildings, and therefore we're happy that every building is going to be blue in the future. So absolutely, we have to think about the future. But how we think about it and how specific we get might not be where we are right now. I don't know how to say that, but anything else? So can somebody make a motion to accept the proposal as it is stated?
I've been told I'm not allowed to make motions, so.
I'd like to make,
You are a
Because you're
member
part of
of the commission at this point in time.
Because you're
What?
part of the quorum, because there's 4.
Oh, I was needed for
1, 2,
quorum?
3.
Oh, all right.
Oh, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, you're not.
So
Sorry,
you-
I was
sorry.
just saying,
So you get
I
to
had to
make the
count, sorry.
motion. If you
No, she
want.
said I'm
No,
not.
'cause
The quorum's
there's-
4.
There's 5. 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, I considered
I'd
you.
like to make a motion to approve the administration recommendation of destination retail.
I don't count me when I'm thinking
Okay.
the other 4, so.
Do we have a
But a
second?
Anyone second?
I will second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing no nays, the motion carried. So with that, we will, I will
you.
remind,
Clarification, he made the motion for only destination retail. He did not mention commercial. We
the
needed to make,
proposal was for both of the two.
did you say both of the two?
For
As-
administration recommendation for destination retail, the column we've been
We
talking
need to make a motion.
Okay, my error.
You want to make a motion for
Ready
the
to vote?
commercial?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the, which one is it? You what?
Recommendation for intensive commercial, this side.
Page over?
Okay, there's 2 pieces, okay. To make a recommendation to approve the intensive commercial, option 4. Anyone second?
I will second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
The next steps for this, and I'll forward you an email as well when the agenda comes out, is it will go to, as far as we know, it will go to the Land and Shore Committee a week from tonight in this building. And they start at what time? 6:30. 6:30 now? Okay. But I will, since I think I have all your emails still, we'll send you that agenda when it goes on live on the website. But that'll be when the council committee starts to talk about it.
With that, I just want to remind you again to read the minutes of the park, of the Old Town Plan. They'll be prepared on the 12th of July.
And that's when we'll start talking about whether or not we want Old 10 into Old Town.
Yeah, there's a whole boundary conversation,
Okay.
north end, south end.
Okay, and
Right.
well, that'll all be dealt with at the next
Do we need
meeting.
to say anything about the letters? Are those still going out tomorrow?
You should say something about the letters.
Okay. There will be a lot of letters sent to the property owners to the north in Old Town, and I know you've been getting a lot of things from us lately, and also those property owners to the south that we've talked about removing from Old Town, so they're all aware of the discussion that we're having. Do you remember how many letters we're sending out?
59 to the north
Oh, wow.
and just over about 150 to the south.
Okay. And the letters, the last draft I saw lets folks know that the zoning doesn't change
It
by
does-
moving out of
It
the
does not say
sub-area?
that. It just
Oh,
says
it
that the
doesn't-
boundaries will be discussed, the boundary changes will be discussed.
Discussed on the 12th, okay.
So, yeah, because it's, there's no zoning impact, but there's a design standard impact.
No, because the areas to the south are not bound by the Old Town Design Standards because they're not within the CBD, Sunset, or the multifamily right behind.
But we're talking about.
But we're talking
adding,
about them in the
so
future.
Right.
It could be.
It could be.
Right.
In the future, if you guys decide to change that.
Okay, we can talk about this next meeting.
Can you guys send us a copy of the letter
Yes,
that's
sure.
going out?
Yes.
Thank you.
So a clarification, we had a public hearing, and it was continued to the 12th?
To the 12th, I believe,
But
I
just
believe
wanted to
that's an
verify.
accurate
We didn't close
statement.
it, we continued the public hearing, so there will be process for opportunities for people to discuss.
Correct. That's my understanding.
Okay. So anything for the good of the order?
Just a big thank you, guys, for taking the extra time to meet, all together, both the property owners and the, city staff. I think that was a really cool example of working together to get something that worked for everyone. So thank you.
So the city cares. So is there anything from staff?
No.
I'd just like to thank. So thank you to our scribe, who does an excellent job. I think, I don't know how she records it all, unless she goes back and listens to it over again and types down everything. I think she does a good job. So with that, if there's nothing else, I'm going to close the meeting at 7:35. And thank you all for coming.
Thanks.
Nice.